Welcome to With You Podcast,
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
And we have a unique, I know we say this all the time, but we have a unique, fun podcast.
I know. We
today.
have a really special guest today. We're doing an interview with somebody that we know,
Yep.
who we followed her life story for a while now, just kind of known about what she's doing.
Yep.
Haven't really known her personally until recently when some of our work intersected.
Yeah.
And it is unique because she's going to remain unnamed. So we won't be publishing her identity for this podcast because some of the work she does is in sensitive parts of the world where it's best she not make a big splash.
Yeah.
So we won't name her. So she's our anonymous friend. But her stories are so great, and we think she's got a lot to share.
Yeah.
And she will share some things about her journey to, working and she talks about where she lives, but she also visits a lot. Like, I can't imagine her passport. She visits people who work all over the world and in some dangerous situations.
Yeah.
She's brave. She's smart, really smart. She's compassionate. She's funny. And
one of the things that I really appreciate is she works with people that might get marginalized sometimes. I mean, and so like refugees and lots of different families, individuals in difficult places in the world. And she enters in, and it's really kind of what this podcast is about, is where do we enter in relationships and how do we navigate difficult transitions? And her stories are about that. It's her life course from when she was 16 to where she is now, and how she developed as a female leader of people and what that means and how it shapes her, but it also shapes the lives of the people she interacts with.
Right. And how she lives a hard and uncomfortable life because of her deep heart for people who are marginalized.
Yeah.
So she has some great stories. And so we're going to spend a little time talking to her, and we know you'll enjoy her as much as we do.
Yeah. So please welcome our friend and enjoy the podcast. All right. We're so glad you're here.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a long time coming. We have wanted to talk to you for almost since the beginning of our podcast. You have such an interesting life.
Yeah, I think, she kind of rivals you on maybe places she's been.
Oh, I think she surpasses me in places she's been.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to catch up.
Yeah, I don't think we'll catch up.
Yeah. So we would love for everybody to get to know you. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about you, about what you do while you're talking to us.
Sure. I grew up in West Michigan in the church, in a Jesus-loving family, and knew from a pretty young age that the Lord was asking me to live a different life. And I couldn't really articulate what that meant for a lot of years of my childhood, but I knew it in my heart. And that call that the Lord was putting on my life was very, when I was 16, 9/11 happened. And that call got words that day that my life was for the Muslim world. I knew it. And that day changed the whole trajectory of my life. And so, so then, I finished college and I moved overseas to the Muslim world. I lived in first Kazakhstan, then Azerbaijan, and then eventually landed in Spain, where I live now. And
wow, I only know where one of those three places are.
Yeah.
I could find them on a map, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Central Asia, West Asia, and then now Southern Europe. So, and so now I've been overseas for 16 years, and they've been incredibly formative years, have changed the way that I look at the world, have changed the way that I look at God and the way that he's pursuing the hearts of my friends, have changed the way that I look at leadership and development of people. And now in the last couple of years, I have found myself moving out a little bit of boots on the ground work with Muslims and refugee people into leadership and development of people doing that work.
So I want to ask you a question back to, like, I love talking, well, not love, but I find it fascinating talking to people about what their memory is about September 10th and then September 12th and what happened on 9/11 in the US, because everybody has a very clear memory of that. And for you, do you remember kind of where you were, what was happening, and how that then crystallized for you, kind of the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, I don't remember anything about September 10th. I was a junior in high school. I was just going to school.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I had just switched high schools. And so I was like maybe a week into my first week in a public high school ever. I had been only in the Christian school system all the way up until that school year.
Okay.
And then for lots of different reasons, we ended up switching schools. And so I was sitting in my second class of the day because school starts so early here. So 9 a.m. was already in my second hour of the day. And it was a world cultures class. And I had only known the people around me for a week. And the classroom that I was sitting in was the closest classroom to the front office of the school. And the secretary came in and she said, "Turn on the TV." And it was even before that second plane had hit. And my biggest memories from that day is, how is this happening and nobody is stopping to pray? Because I had only been in a Christian school for my entire life. And West Michigan is a pretty Christian area in general.
Yeah.
But it was not anyone's first instinct to stop and pause and say, "God, what's happening?" and protect the people in those buildings. And like, it was not that wasn't happening. And it was really caught me off guard. But that morning was so clarifying for me in a call that the Lord had put in my heart years earlier, that this is it. This is what your life's for. I came home and told my parents, "I think God's telling me to move to Saudi Arabia."
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did they respond to a 16-year-old saying that?
They had some tears and they believed me.
They believed you. That's powerful right there. Because that's, our immediate emotional responses to huge things like that sometimes can feel like a flash in the pan and feel like, oh, when I calm down, this will all change. But it really changed for you. It probably helped that your parents were on board.
Yeah. And I had a pretty significant moment with the Lord a few years earlier that I had not been silent about. It was just it was not any big thing, but I was walking. I know exactly where I was and who was with me. And truly, from one step to the next, God changed something in my heart. Like, he opened it and he put a dream in. And from my next time my foot hit the ground, I was on a different path. And I didn't have words for that other than I did not doubt it one single bit. And so then when 9/11 happened and that clarity came to that call, it made so much more sense to me. And then also, I think people that I started talking to about me for the Muslim world, they were like, "Oh, that you have been talking about this for years." But you hadn't been able to articulate.
So it felt in line with what was already happening.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like this beam of like a message that came out of nowhere. It kind of answered some questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from there, how did you get to then actually boots on the ground as
I know. And I was just going to say too, leading into that, like, we know you now as we've been fortunate enough to see you at work now that you've been doing this work for so long. And we know you as a powerhouse in the way you work, but I'm sure it's, in the way you lead. But we'd like to hear kind of how it started. I'm sure it was coming as a girl from Western Michigan going into this context. It must have been a huge shift in the way you saw everything when you moved away.
Yeah. My first year overseas, so I went to college and I graduated as you do, with a degree in a Bachelor of Music in Trumpet Performance.
That seems about right.
Right? Appropriate.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I moved overseas to a village in southern Kazakhstan. And that year was, there's not a word to describe it. It was wild. Crazy things happened. I feel like I stepped out of like my conservative Christian world into a world where the Holy Spirit, I had never experienced the Holy Spirit in real tangible ways in the world and other people. Like I remember being like, Jesus, like the Spirit is healing people. Healing is happening here as people are being prayed for. Or like, God already is here pursuing the hearts of my friends, and yet no Christian has been here. And yet I'm introducing them to a Jesus, and they're like, oh, that's his name? Yo, I know him. You know, it was a year it was a crazy year. And I felt like I was introduced to a God that I did not hardly know. Like I had just had this like Sunday school version of God, which I was 23 years old.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of years. But I like moved from this one picture of God, this one view of him that could fit in a box and into my suitcase and could come with me to Kazakhstan. And I stepped there and I stepped off the plane there, and in my own power could do nothing, not communicate, not understand how to be in the village, not know who am I allowed to look at in the eye and who can't I look at in the eye, and how does this work when the American steps, I was working at a local school, the American steps into school and suddenly like I'm higher than the boss just because my passport. So it was a very steep learning curve. And I think I left for Kazakhstan thinking like, wow, my little hometown newspaper is going to have the headline of like West Michigan native saves village from mudslide. Like this truly like savior complex of like, this is me going to the world to save the world. And that year, that concept got flipped on its head. And I realized that in my own strength, I can do nothing. And the Spirit is powerfully moving in the world. And we get to go as people looking for what Jesus is doing, and then notice it and give our attention to pointing time to that and joining that, instead of coming in with an agenda and saying, let me unleash this Jesus who isn't here on you. He's there.
Yeah, that right there is such a different perspective of power, of leadership, of authority, of going in and being responsive to what's happening versus forcing things to happen or being the agent of things happening. And you were 23 and a single woman in Kazakhstan. Like, how did that work too? So you had the passport that gave you power, but I've learned words from you from our times together, like shame versus honor culture, guilt versus innocence culture, fear versus power culture, right? Do I have them all?
Yeah.
Hey, yay. I always like scoring well on the test. But so you're coming from a culture here in the US that works kind of a certain
guilt,
way.
Innocence.
Yeah, guilt and innocence, to a different culture that you don't even have words for what that is. How was that like as a single 23-year-old?
Yeah. I think that I didn't have also the humility that I needed to enter a culture well.
Yeah, fair.
And I don't know that can be trained into somebody.
I think you have to learn that one the hard way. That's usually how that happens.
At least that's how we've learned.
I mean, I think that's how humility usually happens. It's like a big lesson of knowing where your place is. And yeah, I don't think I think you're right. It's not something that can be taught.
We always
something that has to be learned authentically.
Yeah. We always worry about praying for things like humility or patience, because if you pray for those things,
yeah,
then you're going to get experiences
you're gonna get the experience.
teach you.
Yeah. So for me, I went in very curious and very excited and feeling like this is going to be wildly adventurous. And it was, but I feel like it's a little bit the grace of the Lord that I spent 1 year in my first place and then had to leave. And then I moved across the Caspian Sea to my second country. And because I was received by a village that really loved me and really was fascinated and curious about me as the outsider. And I think that those two things are the grace of God for that first year of overseas work.
Yeah. Did you spend a lot of time that first year working on language? Was that your
I spent a
goal?
fair amount of time, some time doing formal language, but I lived immersed in a village that spoke Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And if I wanted to buy any food, I had to do it in Russian. And I wanted to chat with my neighbor, it was in Russian. And so that language, and I was 23. So language comes quickly.
Yeah, our brains are a little more plastic then, aren't they?
Yeah. So, yeah, I learned a ton and I was received well by people, and I had my eyes open to the way that the Spirit was working in the hearts of people before a believer ever even arrived. And I made all the mistakes, and I made wonderful friends, and I saw the Lord change hearts, and then I couldn't stay. And I didn't understand why, but also I thought, okay, I mean, I have followed the Lord to this village, and if he's going to lead me out of this village, then okay.
So you
I moved
from there to Azerbaijan?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was a totally different situation. I landed in the capital city, which not a ton of foreigners live in Azerbaijan compared to somewhere like Spain, but some. And it's also on the Caspian Sea. And so there's a lot of oil work that happens. So there were British oil workers coming and going. And so you would see around on occasion people who looked like you. And it was a capital city. So whereas like in Kazakhstan, I shopped at a bazaar for meat that was still breathing. And
did you take home live animals?
I did not, but I chose them while they were alive.
You chose them while they were alive.
Oh,
got it.
That's a different way of shopping.
Oh, it is. Was it? It was.
Did you become a vegetarian?
No.
No.
But I did not eat a lot of meat.
Yeah.
It's different, but it's like got a taste.
Look in the eyes of your next meal.
Yeah.
Well, but it does bring you closer to the process of appreciating meal in a different way, right?
Definitely.
It's not just something that shows up, but you see it from the very beginning.
And probably knew some of the people who raised it, I imagine.
Right. Right. And it like, oh, everyone doesn't view these cute little sheep as pets. Everybody? Okay.
No.
Like, yeah, that's a perspective shift.
Yeah. Or what's its name? Oh, we don't name it. It's
Right.
called lunch.
Right. This one is kebab. So I moved from this very rural life where I was shopping for live animals, and I was responsible for a rental cow that came with my little rental house. And I didn't have electricity a lot of the time. And then I moved into a capital city of an oil country that still no one's ever heard of.
Yeah.
But it had a lot of infrastructure, and I could buy frozen chicken breast in the supermarket. And, you know what, like just really different from this rural village life I had lived. And in Baku, I still could have gone like to the outskirts of the city and shopped in bazaars, but it wasn't the way that the people lived.
Yeah. So
it was different.
So moving from Kazakhstan to Azerbaijan, what did you bring with you after that first year? What would you say is the biggest thing you learned about yourself and the work that you came to do in that year?
I think that the most eye-opening thing was that God wasn't in a box that got packed in my suitcase, and that I was not the agent of delivery. I was not the God mailman that opened my suitcase when I arrived in a place and suddenly God got to be there.
Yeah.
But that God was in the world and active in the world and already pursuing my friends in their dreams, and already the Spirit was in their spaces, and they had felt the Spirit of the Lord before. They have felt the joy of the Lord before on different people and in different circumstances. And so it was not totally foreign to anybody, because God was not totally foreign to them.
Mm-hmm.
Was it unique?
Go ahead.
Was it unique to you in terms of the kind of, in the US, we tend to have a faith that's more heady. We think about God, and we have sermons and learn about God. And what you're saying, you're using a lot of spirit words. Was that a difference as well, of kind of a deep intellectual kind of idea of religion, and then experiencing this kind of spirit based? What did that do to you, or what did you notice?
Yeah, that was the primary way that my friends were introduced to God, to our God, to the living God, was through his Spirit. And I would hear things like, friends would come over for dinner and they would be like, why does it feel like this in your house? Or why don't I have headaches here? Or when I sleep in your house, I don't have nightmares. And I left my first summer and came back to visit my family. And when I returned, I felt like my friends, my colleagues at work were saying things like, oh, it's back. Whatever that is that you bring with you that fills this place, that's back. And I think probably what they were feeling was joy and peace and love and honor, and it was the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
And when my parents came and visited, people said to my mom, why are you actually shining? Like, actually, you are shining. And those are things that we in the Western world, our eyes don't see. And I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
But supernatural is very removed from us here.
Yeah.
There, it is very close. So I started to pray prayers like, Spirit of God, go with me and leave with me, so that my friends understand the life that lives in me, and then feel it leave, and then feel it return, and feel it go, that they might feel drawn to, how do I have that life?
Yeah.
How do I have that joy, that peace? And then people would notice things about space and about the way the Spirit would enter a space. And it took me a very long time to put words to what was happening. Probably, I don't even know. I don't think in those years I had words for what was happening. Just that I asked the Lord to guide my steps, and I asked the Spirit to be present in my work, and he was. And now I can see it much more clear than I could when I was in the middle of it.
So in both of those cultures, when you arrived as a young American woman, like what were some of the biggest challenges, and maybe some of the mistakes that you feel, looking back, that you feel you made, or that were obvious in the moment?
I think that I shied away from the honor that people would try to give. And
what did that look like? What do you mean, the honor they tried to give?
Yeah, so like as I became good friends with different local people, pretty much every local who lives in the capital has a village that they come from.
Yeah.
They grew up in that village. That's pretty much their whole extended family lives out in that village. It's hours away in the mountains. And so as I became good friends with people, I started to go and visit their villages for weddings or for holidays. And the honor that they would show to a visitor feels uncomfortable to me in the way I grew up. But like, it was, please choose the animal please choose the sheep that you'd like us to kill for you.
Yeah.
Right. And then please eat this choice portion, this guest portion of this meat. We all want this part of the animal, but we're going to give it to you. And oh my gosh, you want me to just eat this kebab of chunks of roasted fat. And that's the part that you want. And can I even swallow this?
Yeah.
Or like the organs, all the organs. I don't want to eat the organs. Like, I just want a little bit of the meat if I want anything, but it was uncomfortable to be constantly held up above everyone in the village
as the honored guest. Yeah. Because you just wanted to blend in and be one of them. And I mean, you can't really blend in, but you want to just be part of the community and not a special outsider.
Right. Or like if my school was putting on an event, there was always me at the front, always my face at the front, as like you bring our school honor because our school has someone from the outside. And I didn't want that. And it felt like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to steward that responsibility well in that culture.
Yeah. And it's probably insulting to say, don't treat me this way too. You can't really shun that.
Right.
So you move from this small village learning these lessons and you're in the bigger city. So your work there is doing what when you're in Baku?
Yeah, so the way to be there is on a work visa. So I worked at a local school.
Mm-hmm. Teaching trumpet or trombone? Or...
Teaching English and writing and test prep and that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and then I just got to develop relationships with all of the people around me.
Yeah. And how was that? So I'm assuming Azerbaijan is more of a shame honor culture. And if we're talking generalities, and how does an American single woman fit into the Azerbaijani culture, both as a teacher and developing relationships?
That's a good question. So honor shame is very different than the way we do culture in the West. Things that we might say are wrong because we structure around you're guilty or you're innocent. If it's not something that brings shame to your family, it's not necessarily wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
picture that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like an example will come to me as I talk about it, but basically like the ultimate job of you as a member of a family or of a household is, how do I bring honor to my household? How do I honor my parents or the name of our family? How do I bring us honor, and how do I definitely not bring us shame?
So like living out of gender roles, if you kind of shifted and responded a different way than maybe what was expected, would that bring shame? So if I did all the cooking and cleaning and Tara was the main worker in Azerbaijan, there's nothing wrong with that, but would that bring our family honor or shame? Is it things like that?
Well, yeah, that's actually a good example, is that so on my team, there were lots of families. And when those husbands after dinner would say, I'll do the dishes, they would have to close their curtains.
Really? See, I love doing the dishes, and that would be a problem.
Yeah, a problem for me.
It actually would be.
Yeah. Because you're bringing. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So you literally have to not let people know that that's how your household runs, because it was kind of outside the norm.
At least at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't want your neighbor's first impression of you as the man of the house to be, I looked through your window and you were washing dishes and you're doing it every night. So are you the man of the house? You don't want that to be your neighbor's first impression. However, there is some aspect of that introduces someone enough to, okay, let me back it up a little bit. if I'm with a family, so say I bring my best friend home to a family on my team and we share a meal together, that person has gotten to know me, has gotten to know the ways that I am as an American, for better or for worse, and the ways that I am as a follower of Jesus. And they'll come with me to one of my friends' houses, and they will be at that table with me, and they will, because they know me, they're going to have a lot of grace and make a lot of space for people who are also at that table who are not Azerbaijani. And so we found there to be a lot of power in living the way that a Jesus following family lives. And I'm not saying that every Jesus following husband has to wash dishes. I don't know. I don't know that that's the case.
Yeah.
But
feet, dishes. I mean, it's all kind of example of Jesus.
But I would say that there is a lot that goes unspoken when there is a husband who honors his wife and kids. And that is not always the case, or maybe rarely the case where they grew up. Or that there would be a man who serves, whether that be in cleaning up or whether that be in bringing food to the table to eat, or whether that be in changing a kid's diaper or going upstairs to put the kids to bed. And so there is some upside downness to the way that Americans live compared to the way that Middle Easterners, West Asianers live. That is interesting.
Yeah.
And then when they add it on to their beginning knowledge of the upside down nature of the kingdom of God when Jesus came to the world, like there starts to be, they start to notice things and they start to think, that is interesting. Like, I want to know more about that. Or I've actually never heard a man talk to his wife that way. Why do you do that? Or why is he willing to go and make tea for us women as we are sitting and talking? Or so it reframed, it gave a different framework for the way that a family might flourish together as Jesus followers for people who didn't follow Jesus.
Yeah. Well, and that's a lot. You said a lot about the man's role being different. What did it look like in a different way for a woman in a family, but also for you? How did your life look different, and how did you maybe have to adjust some things, like culturally, in the way you lived?
Yeah, I had to adjust a lot of things. And then adjust a lot of things initially, at least, because as people began to know me and began to know my background and what I believed, and they made more space for me to be as I was. But early on, you go to a house and they think that you're going to want this traditional men eat here, women eat here, women cover their heads when we're all together.
Yeah.
The food is prepared and served by women, cleared by women, cleaned by women while we sit. For me, I didn't grow up in a house like that. And I didn't grow up in a culture like that. And I have a fairly strong personality, and I'm kind of not willing to just do things because that's the way we've always done them.
Yeah.
I
mean,
love
like,
that about you.
Just how did that feel? How did that feel for you walking into, because I know you as a strong woman who knows what she wants, and that's a beautiful thing, and especially in our culture, that's more celebrated. But in that culture, I'm sure that way of being is not celebrated or really made room for. So, like, how did that just feel watching women live their lives like that? And how did you enter into that?
I think because of my first year and because of all of the observing I got to do of what this kind of culture was like in a different context, I think I was able to enter Baku saying, I am willing to be what I need to be. I'm willing to be what these people need me to be so that they might see Jesus in me. Because if I just lived as an American lived in front of them, that's all they would see.
Yeah.
Is this piece of American culture. And I had to work hard against the things that the globalization that comes out of the US, the ways that had made people think that I lived. I already was working against those kind of things.
They made some assumptions maybe before you even got there. So did you cover your head? Did you, you sit separately? You did all those things?
Yeah, I did. I never went against what was required culturally of me. And then as I got to know families, I was accepted as a family member and brought into households. And I became a daughter and a sister and a granddaughter and a niece and an auntie. And those things catapulted me forward in relationship, but also made families willing to have me as a family member and not just an outsider. And so then that changed the way that I could be with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it does make sense.
They experienced you differently. And I think Tara and I think about this in terms of a lot of times we think relationships one way, and it's really mutual, and we are mutually affected. So they started experiencing you different. How did you notice you being changed from experiencing them differently?
I think I gave a lot more grace to the way that their culture conditioned them to be. Which is, if I were to just list the ways that their culture conditioned, like if I were to list the ways that culture conditioned men to be, it would sound so negative.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's just that culture. And entering in from someone who was raised to be a strong, independent person and then went into the world to be that as a woman, as an unmarried woman, those things that I would list as things I value would be turnoffs to that culture.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of contrast just at the base level about how we are raised, how we raise our people to be, how we raise our kids to be, the way families are together, the way women and men are held, the power distance between men and women that form the way that the culture is. And both of them would look at each other and say, this is not good. We don't want this. We don't want this influence. And so I found myself giving a lot of grace for the ways that culture had made men to be Azerbaijani men. Because that is what was expected of them and required of them and taught to them. And unless they had a lot of experience or touch with the outside world or an outside perspective, they wouldn't have a reason to question those things or to experiment with living it another way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking too about, we think about your life as a woman there having a lot of restrictions, right? The first thing we think about is, oh, wow, you probably had a lot of limits on what you could do compared to the way you can live your life in the States. But did you find that did you notice any things that were actually advantages about being who you were, being a single woman in this culture that were surprising, that maybe gave you different inroads or that showed you why who you were was just what you needed to be in that spot?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as I talk to young women now who are looking at moving to these parts of the world as single women, often they ask, should I wait to get married before I go?
Should I wait and get married before I go? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Right. Like, should I wait in the States until I find who I'm going to marry them, and then we go?
So be on the lookout for a guy who's got a similar mission, and then go.
Right. Right. And I have gotten to talk to them about actually how powerful it is to go as a single woman into a society that is not built for single women because, and this is going to sound negative, but actually ended up being maybe the most positive aspect of my life in Central Asia, West Asia, that I went in single and young, and everyone thought, like, I had only heard it might take you years to be invited into someone's home. And I was invited into someone's home my second week. And it only increased from there, like more and more people. And it was kind of a fascinating thing to people watching, but it was because people would say to me, wow, you must have a terrible dad because you are not married and he let you leave his home and he let you move to this country. You left your country and moved here. He let you do that? What a terrible dad. Like,
so they put their lens on you and thought maybe this poor girl has not been cared for well, so let's take her in.
Right. And enfold her right away, rescue her. And so right from the beginning, it flipped those power dynamics that I automatically bring in as a white Western American. It flipped them upside down and it put me in the weak position of this floundering single woman with a terrible father who just released her into the world to be rescued by a family.
And just an aside, your dad is a lovely, loving, wonderful man.
I was waiting to put that in. Both your mother and father are loving, generous people that their love of letting you, rather than sending you out, of supporting you and letting you go, must have been really hard act of love for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
A strong act of love. But wow, how interesting that lens that people saw you through was actually kind of an inroad, was a helpful thing.
It automatically put me in the weaker position, which is a really hard position to attain in that culture as someone who comes with a lot of power and privilege.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, I'll be your little weak kitten that needs to be rescued if that allows me into your home.
And actually, I kind of did need that.
Yeah.
Like, I could have made a way for myself. But the fact that I didn't have to, the fact that I was folded into households of people, that I automatically had men looking out for me in a country where you have to have male covering to do anything, that I had that right from the beginning with local people. And I needed it. And I wouldn't have been able to articulate that I did need it.
Yeah. Well, and when you say male covering, there might be people listening that have no idea what that means. I didn't know the first time I heard that. So when you talk about male covering, it's not a baseball cap or
right. Yeah. It's basically without a man supporting you, and without the neighborhood or the village or the group of people that you live among knowing that you have a man who is above you, it's very difficult to live as a woman. And so, gosh, I don't really know how to talk about this.
So you have to have some authority over you, sort of like protection or authority from a man.
And so your honor is actually that man's honor. And so were someone to do something against you, it is actually doing something against them. You as a woman don't actually matter that much, but it is this person's honor that they are going against, or that they are giving shame to. And so that, having that built in because of my weakness, ended up being something that advanced my position in relationship with a lot of people that I didn't even know to look for. And I didn't move there seeking, but it gave it to me very quickly because of this perceived position of weakness that I came in. And to me, it was perceived, but to them it was, no, this is actual weakness. This is actually not safe for you.
Yeah. And maybe it was perceived on that part, but in truth, you were vulnerable. In that culture, like in actuality. And I think that's one of the most powerful things to think about, is that vulnerability and that perceived or actual weakness can really be a strength. and really
Yes.
is a strength in relationship that we don't seek. We don't seek that as our position, but it can really be a really valuable thing.
Yeah. And so then it was fascinating to watch. My parents did come to visit, even inside of my first year there, they came to visit, and to watch my friends realize, oh, you're not a terrible father. Oh, you support this. You allow this. And then there was, all the other cultural things of my friends being shocked that my parents got to marry for love. And
Mm.
what does it look like if your marriage is chosen and not arranged and not within your family and not, but like you guys love each other. Like my friends would be like, did you see your dad hold your mom's hand? Did you see that? It was so lovely. Like it just the amount of affection and love between them spoke more than their words could ever speak to my friends who maybe had this picture of a neglectful father who sent his 23-year-old into a part of the world that maybe they wouldn't think was great. And then they met them, and their ideas about what kind of father that might have been were destroyed.
Well, and that would be amazing connection to the gospel, right? In terms of
Definitely.
who God is as a loving father in a very different way than shame, honor,
And letting us make choices that
letting us
might
make
hurt us.
choices, supporting us in places where it doesn't make sense. The connection of seeing that lived out in your family and you being there. Are those stories that then led to conversations more about the spiritual world?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And I mean, you guys know my parents. It would be hard to watch them and not wonder about what's all behind that, and how does this healthy relationship continue on after 45 years? And what about, like, why is there so much affection? And like it blew the minds of my friends. And they still ask me about, how are your parents? How are your parents? Everybody doing fine? Like, your parents doing okay? Because they want only the best, absolute best things for them, because they are so taken with how they are taken with each other.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it spoke volumes to them. And I think, even having my parents visit the number of times that they did extended my reach into these families as well, into these households that had folded me in, because I connected. I was loved and received by every level of that household, but I connected with my peer well in that household, my friend. Whereas then my parents would come and sit at the table, and it was another level of connection.
Mm.
Household, it was another generation of connection in a way that my parents maybe couldn't connect that way with my peer, my friend, but with their parents, they could, and in a way that I couldn't. And so it deepened that household's ability to see what a flourishing family that follows Jesus looks like.
Yeah. I find it interesting, even your household kind of languaging, because we hear that as for me in my household within scripture, within the Christian text, there is more of this languaging than the guilt and innocent aspect of the U.S. culture, that the household and the sense of a bigger thing than just the individual that you got to participate in and get to know real well. I bet that shaped your leadership for when you shifted from Azerbaijan to Spain and being more in leadership than boots on the ground. I wonder if you could tell us some stories and talk about the lessons that you learned from those times in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, and this idea of honor, shame, how that's affected your leadership as you now oversee a lot of people in those countries.
Yeah. I think it changed, putting things into that framework of household and the way that Muslims are in the world changed the way that I thought about how to be with them. And it was interesting to when I moved from Azerbaijan to Spain, the move was to work with refugee people. And those one thing that makes a refugee Muslim person particularly vulnerable is that they are removed from their household.
Mm.
Yeah.
that they have had to leave behind all of the things that define them and give them purpose and give them identity. And they had to restart as just a couple or just an individual or one person who even left his husband and one person who left her husband and children behind, or one man who left his wife and children behind. And so they suddenly were removed from the whole structure that they had lived their lives protected by and enfolded by. And so that makes that puts people in a very vulnerable position. And so leadership wise, organizationally, my first couple of years in Spain, I started a refugee center with some friends. And the way that we put things in place for Muslim refugees was almost a way of providing a householding experience for people to gather with others as family, even if they are not blood. Because that is the way that they know how to be, and the way that they learn who they are is by being inside of a household. And so the way that we structured even different social events or language classes was very familial and very intentional, based on relationship instead of just academic or just for fun. Because people left what they needed, and they needed a way to re-find some semblance of that so that they could find a way to flourish in Spain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 We're both thinking
know,
hard
I'm
about
think-
that
yeah.
because it's all about systems and community and finding your identity. We're so ingrained in our U.S. Framework of the individual, right? That I think that's what a lot of David's work in systems sees the world that way. And so that's partly why we're so drawn to the work you do and the cultures that you work with, because they're so based in community and household. And I see myself within this system. And it's cool that you learned how to reach these people and care for these people by helping them create their own recreate their own context that makes them feel safe.
Yeah. And just thinking, so my mind's a little blown in some of the questions I want to ask. I'm like, oh, that's so centered in the right and wrong kind of idea of guilt and innocent. Like, okay, what's right, what's not right about that process? And the stories you're telling are so different about, like Tara was saying, mutual influencing and relational influencing and a sense of community resourcing. I'm okay as long as my community is with me and is okay, versus me centering on me. It shifts and it's a hard, because I kind of go back and forth. How do you navigate? I imagine that in organizations, not just the one you're with now, but previous organizations that are set up to meet needs in a different culture can start to be affected by that. And just even thinking about men and women dynamics in an organization, you being a female leader, most of the ministry that you've been part of in organizations have been to these kind of male covering organizations. How do you find space to have your voice as an unmarried woman that is gifted in lots of different leadership ways? How does that play out? Yeah, now it's your turn to have your mind blown, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a really good question. And for me, I moved out of leading this refugee center and into more of an organizational leadership position just a couple of years ago. And that it's been an interesting journey of recognizing I have something to bring to the table here, and having to advocate for myself, and having to be comfortable bringing strengths that only men had brought before, strategic strengths, or like strong communication strengths that might be used from the front of the room or in teaching. It was uncomfortable for me to be put in positions at different times, while I could have articulated that those are strengths that I have and can bring to the table. It's often uncomfortable to be some of the first women asked to bring those.
Mm-hmm.
And then you are in an organization with different levels of comfort toward women leading, and having to navigate what that looks like when even on your own team there's different comfort levels of that. But I think I have settled into, like, over the last 2 years, I think I have settled into myself a little bit, and I have recognized that not everyone can be comfortable all the time, but I know what I bring, and I want to bring it, and I want to be a part of shaping the culture of the organization that I'm in, that I really believe is the best organization to do this kind of work with.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be part of shaping what it's going to look like for the next 40 years. And so there's different levels of comfort at different times, but I have been championed by different people inside of the org, and I have been developed by different people. And so now I get to step out in leadership in some ways that I would have not expected, but have been good. And I feel like I'm feeling my way forward a little bit, figuring out what's good and what's not, and what's accepted and what's uncomfortable, and then kind of living at the edges of that. And
I think that's the common thread for you. I feel like living at the edge is a little bit like what is a common thing in all of your situations, is that you're not afraid to be uncomfortable. And I think maybe that's what it takes to grow as a person and to find your way in using your skills, in different ways that might have not been used before. Because it seems like in all of these situations, comfort zone is kind of a funny word, because you've been living outside that, or you're just or you're okay with other people being uncomfortable too. Like you have to be you've been a groundbreaker in a lot of ways. And I have a feeling you're never going to be happy if you're just starting to get too comfortable.
That's another thing I've noticed about myself, is that I'm not someone who's just going to stick in it because it's going well.
Yeah.
If it's going well, then I'm probably going to move on.
Then what's the next thing?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, people, I see us having the same spiritual gift, although at Wheaton College, the theology people say it's not a spiritual gift. It's the spiritual gift of agitation.
Yes.
That
disruption.
They're like, David, that's not a real thing. I think you mean exhortation. I'm like, okay, whatever. But that you're uncomfortable means I'm living it out. And I see that in you. I see you have this gift of entering in and speaking things that might be implicit in a culture or in an organization or in relationships, and making it explicit and being okay with that. And then things can change. But a lot of times we're afraid of that. And so I'm just kind of curious, as we wrap up, this season for us has been about pain and play. I think we've talked a little bit about the pain side of things. I'd love to hear a little bit more, because I think being able to be an agitator means you're having to be willing to play. What ways do you kind of play to balance out for you, whether it's in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, or in Spain? What's the things you do to practice playfulness?
She's such a hard worker. I know she's going to have to think hard about this.
Well, I can help her.
We've played
with you. So we have ideas, but that's just with us. I'm curious of what you do playing outside of our relationship.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I love I don't know how we're defining play here, but
However you want.
I love social time with people and unstructured time, and I rest well with people. And just about any activity. I love playing board games. I hate hiking, but if we're doing them with people, great. I can love hiking if we're all hiking together. And then I think for me, there are a few cognitive things that really enliven my brain and that feels like play to me. So like I love chasing curiosities about the things that are drawing me. Like I can go on a deep dive on Shia militia groups and really enjoy that.
I didn't know if I heard that right.
Yeah, you heard that right.
Okay. Shia militia
we
groups.
don't need to repeat that.
And I also can look at like exploration. Like exploration is very exciting to me. And I think because of my job and because of my heart, a lot of that exploration also looks like my work, which is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Those things can line up, but thinking creatively and strategically about how to bring the gospel into places that are entirely unengaged with the gospel is really, really fun and really exciting. And I get to do it with people that it also excites and that it also brings to life. And so those end up being like discussions and then turn into trips that are a ton of fun. And it's not the kind, and that's not going to be on the fun list for 99% of the people, but yes. In the world, that's fine. But it is really exciting. And so I think that it's neat to see that the way that my work has continued to evolve over the last 16 years, there's a lot of intersection between work and play.
That's when you're in the zone, man. That is amazing. And as you were struggling to define that too, we've been thinking a lot about play, and we heard an interesting podcast about fun as well. You mentioned that word a few times, and I think the short definition that we've kind of come to is play is what happens when you're in that zone where you just lose track of time, where you don't have pressures on having to finish, and it's giving you
it's called flow, right?
You're in that flow. You're just enjoying yourself. But most and the podcast that I'll mention is called Funology. It's the Ologies podcast, and they talk about a definition of fun. And usually when people say, list out things that are fun for them, it usually is sharing that play with somebody else. So it's the social part of it and the trips. And so it sounds like for you that you have a lot of things that you do yourself to explore and to dig deep, and that's play for you. And then the fun is being social with it and sharing it with other people.
Yeah. Remember when she took us on a tour of that little town, but it was pitch black and we didn't see anything? That was fun.
She made us sit on a donkey.
She made us sit on and took a picture. Maybe you'll put it right here. No, we're not doing video. So if we were doing video, we would have the picture of you and I on a statue donkey.
Yeah.
That you took
Thank
a picture
goodness
of
it wasn't a walking donkey.
Yeah.
We would have crushed that thing.
That poor thing would have been sway back. But yeah, it's relationship. I mean, as you've shared, the painful things have come out of relationships, but there's been learning. Your leadership is very relational oriented, and your play is. It's really nice to meet someone that's congruent across those domains.
Yeah. We're excited to see what's next for you, because we think you seem to be in a really great zone right now with what you're doing. We've gotten to witness some of your work. But I know there's always something brewing in your brain for what's next, and just following the spirit, of where you're being led. And that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah.
One last question. What should we have asked you that we didn't, that needs to be talked about before we end?
Anything else you want people to know about you, or a takeaway about being a woman in a position like yours?
Oh, nothing is coming to me. but I mean, I guess I would reiterate the fact that we need women in leadership, and we need women who are willing to lead men, and we need the experience. I mean, the world is filled with single women doing gospel work. It is a very high percentage of women on the mission field. And we need those women to bring their experience and their knowledge to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want that for them, and I want that for me, and I want that for the world. Like we need what women bring to leadership. Yeah. And we need that to shape the way that we continue to be in the world as Jesus followers.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a beautiful job. We love what you do, and we love that you spent some time with us, because we know you're always on the move, always moving somewhere else. So we're lucky we got to spend a little bit of time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.